Do you believe in the multiverse theory? The theory that there is a grouping of hypothetical multiple universes in which everything exists? A universe where Olympic sank and Titanic didn't? A universe where both ships sank? One where they sailed together on a maiden voyage? One where they didn't exist at all? One where they were airships? Point being, thanks to the multiverse theory, pretty much everything that I explain about in this lesson can be considered correct. To a point. Let's create a universe where Titanic is sailing happily along in April 1912, and for whatever reason, she does not sink. To make it simple, because we can go down an unfortunate series of events and end up in a world that's destroyed if Titanic isn't sunk, let's just focus on the immediate ramifications that would happen to Titanic and her sister ships, and perhaps the shipping lines and industry as a whole. Not the extra lives saved and generations we'd now have, and again the world possibly being destroyed if Titanic doesn't sink. So Titanic doesn't sink on April 15th. What happens the next couple of days? Events were planned aboard ship which never got to occur. That boat drill was supposedly proposed by Captain Smith. It could have been done on Monday. It depends on the weather. Carpathia ran into storms going to New York, but she was much slower than Titanic. The passengers were going to have an unofficial dog show. Concerts were going to continue and dinners. Life as normal for the 2,208 passengers and crew was to go on mundanely. Titanic would arrive on, most likely, Tuesday night, April 17th. Her passengers would have the option to stay aboard her and have breakfast the morning of the 18th, and the ship would take on supplies, cargo, and get ready for her first eastbound crossing on Saturday the 20th, back to Europe. It would be the beginning of a life at sea for this ocean liner. And it would continue for the next 2 years, probably without incident. A good example is her sister, Olympic. Except for a couple of accidents which her crew learned from, her career was great. Contrary to popular belief, even right after Titanic, Olympic was a popular ocean liner. She had to go in for refits throughout her career, and Titanic would have to do the same. One of those refits was to get new lifeboats following Titanic's sinking. Now, here's where our new timeline becomes tricky. There are a couple other sinkings after Titanic which were greatly overshadowed by Titanic and World War I soon to follow. Might these shipwrecks become the Titanic disaster instead? Or at least help to create laws and regulations to improve safety requirements and add lifeboats to Olympic, Titanic, and all other ocean liners? Indeed, when Lusitania gets torpedoed, with or without adequate lifeboats, there will not be enough time to launch them all, so the death toll will stay about the same. In our new timeline, I think it is a guarantee that at some point early in the 20th century, a Titanic-level event would provoke the governments to enact safety laws for the shipping industry. It always takes a disaster in hindsight, never foresight, to create action. Now, what would happen to our new Titanic during the Great War? Britannic, her newly launched and completed sister ship by the time the war started, because her construction wasn't halted and she didn't need a complete redesign, and Titanic's oldest sister ship Olympic would still probably go join the war service, as did the great Cunarders, Aquitania and Mauretania. Now, except for the real-life Britannic, all these fast liners survived the war, some with grand adventures like Olympic. She was torpedoed, luckily it failed to detonate, and she rammed a German U-boat, sinking it. Britannic had circumstances just like Titanic when she sank, a combination of unfortunate events. So many little mistakes which came together to cause a disaster, a sinking. It seems more than likely Titanic would become a troop ship or hospital ship, or both. Aquitania and Mauretania were both during their wartime service. Titanic might have had wartime adventures like these grand ocean liners, and perhaps the public would lovingly know Titanic for these reasons, not because she sank. Olympic's wartime record is one of the main reasons why she got the nickname Old Reliable. After the war, our now painted up and dirty Titanic would go back to Belfast for more refits. New paint, some fresh interiors, and in a couple years, boilers made to burn oil instead of coal. Titanic would have many good sailing years with her sister Olympic and either Britannic or Majestic. Majestic if Britannic was still lost during the war and White Star Line was given Germany's Bismarck as reparations. Movie stars, politicians, musicians, the famous of the day would have sailed aboard Titanic during the 20s, and thousands of folks wanting a vacation over the ocean, flapping and dancing the Charleston across the Atlantic. There's all sorts of evidence for this with the many years of profit from Olympic's real-life service, along with Majestic. There would have been that happy rival between Cunard and White Star, of course, and who knows how intense it could have gotten, with White Star having 3 giant ocean liners to match Cunard's. Which one would still have to buy out the other when the Great Depression strikes in 1929? Most likely Cunard being partially government funded for the construction of Queen Mary, with the condition they bought White Star in 1934. But that brings us to Titanic's fate. With the transatlantic trade changing from ferrying immigrants to vacationers and business people, Titanic and Olympic would find themselves quickly attempting to catch up to modern liners. Britannic, if she had survived, might have the upper hand. She was to have some passenger improvements that possibly would have still gone into her, which her older sisters lacked. Most importantly, private baths in first class. But these attempts to modernize Titanic, from decor changes to adding tourist class areas, just wouldn't cut it, and she would likely meet the same end as her sister in the mid-30s. Titanic would join Olympic at the scrapworks, be broken down, her fittings auctioned off, and her hull disassembled, and iron and steel melted down. Britannic possibly had just enough time then to join Aquitania for World War II. It would have been quite a sight to see these two magnificent ocean liners sailing in the fleet, serving their countries with pride in both conflicts. But eventually, like Aquitania, Britannic too would have been scrapped. I would go so far to say Queen Mary, which now is serving as a floating hotel in Long Beach, California, would have also been scrapped if Titanic never sank. Titanic is the reason why most of us are even interested in ocean liners and ships. It's the reason why you're listening to me ramble on. There is some appeal for ocean liners. I don't believe many fans of automobiles get into the hobby because of a car crash, but her story and her legacy are what really stand out and make all the other liners famous. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Show anyone a photo of an old ocean liner, your average person on the street, and they won't be able to identify it properly. They'll just call it the Titanic. Now, if we have a machine that takes us into a parallel universe where Titanic didn't sink, show that same photo to the same parallel person on the street, they'll look at that photo and they'll just say, that's a boat. But this is all theory. Many people ask all the time what would happen to Titanic if she never went down. But what do you believe would have occurred? How drastic would the shipping industry have changed? Would we even have cruise ships today? Would James Cameron have a career still? Or would he have retired happily after Aliens? So many possibilities, and in theory, they all exist. Let us know in a comment. For Titanic University, I'm Matthew DeWinkler, from the universe where Titanic did sink.